Before we begin, drop a comment below with your country and what time it is right now where you're watching. Whether it's sunrise in Nairobi, midnight in New York, afternoon in Canada, or evening in France, I want to know. Don't just sit back. Tell me where in the world you are. Now let's dive into the story. The radio crackled with static and screams. Captain Thessaly Crane stood in the operations center aboard the USS Sentinel. Her fingers white-knuckled around the edge of the metal table as 15 voices begged for extraction. New Year's Eve fireworks exploded over the Iranian coastline in the distance. But here, 30 miles offshore, the only explosions that mattered were the ones tearing through her team. Overwatch, we are taking heavy fire. Where is our air support? The voice belonged to Lieutenant Bridger Knox, and Thessaly could hear the panic threading through his usual calm. Behind his words came the rapid pop of gunfire, the whistle of incoming mortars, and something worse, the wet cough of a man drowning in his own blood. She looked up at Commander Vex Harland, whose face remained carved from stone as he listened to men die. Harland's jaw tightened, but he didn't reach for the comms. Instead, he turned to Admiral Kip Torrance, whose eyes were fixed on satellite imagery showing enemy reinforcements flooding toward the SEALs' position. The mission had been clear. Infiltrate the weapons facility, gather intelligence, get out before midnight. But intelligence had been wrong. The facility wasn't lightly guarded. It was a trap, and now 15 of America's finest were pinned down in a concrete hellhole with walls closing in. "Sir, we need to scramble the Ospreys now," Thessaly said, her voice steady despite the thunder in her chest. But Harland shook his head slowly, and in that gesture, she saw the death sentence. "The risk is too high. We've got Iranian jets scrambling from 3 airbases. We send birds in there, we lose them and the SEALs." Thessaly's breath caught. She had flown rescue missions in Syria, Afghanistan, and Somalia. She had pulled men from burning helicopters and carried wounded soldiers through minefields. Never, not once, had she heard a commander say those words. "We lose them anyway if we don't go," she said, and her voice came out harder than intended. The operations room went silent. 6 officers turned to look at her, their faces ranging from shock to fury. Harland's eyes narrowed into slits. "You forget yourself, Captain. This is not your decision to make. We have strategic considerations beyond one team." Strategic considerations. The words tasted like ash. Through the speakers, another voice joined the chorus of desperation. "We've got wounded who won't make it another 10 minutes. For God's sake, someone answer us." That was Lieutenant Commander Merrick Stone, and Thessaly knew him, knew his wife Clara was 8 months pregnant, knew he'd promised to be home before the baby came. She looked at the digital clock on the wall. 23:47. 13 minutes until midnight. 13 minutes until a new year began and 15 families received folded flags. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, words he'd spoken before his last deployment. "Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing aren't the same, Tess. When that happens, you'll know what to do." Admiral Torrance leaned over the map, his finger tracing enemy positions. "We wait for the political situation to clarify. If the Iranians make the first move against our air assets, we have justification. Until then, the team maintains position." Maintains position, a clinical phrase for lying in your own blood while enemies close in. Thessaly's eyes moved to the flight deck monitor showing her Osprey, fully fueled, crew ready, rotors waiting. The radio screamed again. "Mayday, mayday. We've got men down. Building is compromised. Enemy is breaching the south wall." The voice broke on the last word, dissolved into static and gunfire. Harland reached over and turned down the volume. Not off, just down, as if the dying could be made more comfortable by being quieter. Something inside Thessaly Crane snapped clean in two. She thought of her brother Marcus, killed in Fallujah when air support arrived too late. She thought of the medal they'd given her father posthumously, as if metal could replace flesh. She thought of 15 mothers who would spend every New Year's Eve for the rest of their lives remembering this night. Her hand moved to her flight jacket hanging on the chair. When she picked it up, Harland's voice cut through the room like a blade. "Captain Crane, you are dismissed. Return to your quarters. That is a direct order." Thessaly looked him in the eye, and for the first time in her 12-year career, she smiled at a superior officer giving her a command. Then she spat on the floor between them, turned on her heel, and ran for the flight deck. 16 years earlier, Thessaly Crane had been a skinny 12-year-old girl standing in a cemetery in Arlington, Virginia, watching them fold her father's flag. Rain poured from a gray sky that looked like God himself was weeping, and her mother's hand trembled in hers as the officer approached with that triangle of cloth. "On behalf of a grateful nation," he'd said, and young Thessaly had wanted to scream that the nation hadn't been grateful enough to send help when her father radioed for extraction in Kandahar. 3 helicopters had been grounded due to a sandstorm. Regulations said it was too dangerous to fly. Her father and his team had died waiting for whether that was deemed acceptable. She'd learned then that sometimes courage meant breaking rules that killed good people. Her mother, Rebecca Crane, had been a flight nurse in Desert Storm, and she'd raised Thessaly with stories of rotors and rescue missions instead of fairy tales. "Your father believed in service above self," she'd said the night after the funeral, both of them sitting in the dark living room unable to sleep. "But he also believed in bringing people home. Remember that, Tess. The mission matters, but the people matter more." Those words had carried Thessaly through the Naval Academy, through flight school where instructors called her reckless for pushing aircraft to their limits, through her first combat deployment where she'd flown into a hot landing zone against direct orders because 3 Marines were bleeding out. She'd been written up for insubordination and awarded a medal for valor in the same week. The contradiction had taught her something crucial. The system rewarded results but punished initiative, and you had to be willing to pay the price for doing what was right. She'd met Bridger Knox during a joint training exercise in California 6 years ago. He'd been a young SEAL lieutenant then, cocky and brilliant, with a smile that could charm classified information from a stone. They'd spent 3 days running scenarios, and he'd told her about his sister Lyra, who had cerebral palsy and wanted to be an astronaut. "She can't walk," he'd said, "but she's got more courage than anyone I know. She taught me that limitations are just challenges you haven't figured out how to overcome yet." That philosophy had bonded them. They'd become friends, real friends, the kind forged in shared beliefs rather than shared circumstances. He'd introduced her to the rest of his team, and over the years, she'd flown support for their missions in 5 different countries. She knew their wives, their children, their fears, and their dreams. Merrick Stone was different. Quiet where Bridger was loud, thoughtful where others were reactive. He'd grown up in Montana, son of a rancher who'd taught him that a man's word was his bond and protecting the herd meant sacrificing yourself if necessary. He joined the SEALs not for glory but because he believed some people ran toward danger so others didn't have to. His wife Clara had been a schoolteacher before they married, and she'd given up her career to follow him from base to base, never complaining, always supportive. Merrick carried a photo of her in his helmet, and before every mission, he'd kiss it once. "For luck," he'd say, but Thessaly knew it was really a promise. "I'm coming home to you." Now that promise was being broken by men in air-conditioned rooms making calculated decisions about acceptable losses. The memory of her father's death and her friendships with these men collided in Thessaly's mind as she ran down the ship's corridors toward the flight deck. Behind her, she heard boots pounding, security coming to stop her. She'd known this would happen. The moment she'd walked out of that operations room, she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Court-martial waited on the other side of this decision, probably prison, definitely the end of her career. But careers didn't bleed. Careers didn't have children waiting for parents who would never come home. She burst through the hatch onto the flight deck, salt spray hitting her face, wind whipping her dark hair. Her crew chief, Petty Officer Iris Dahl, stood by the Osprey, eyes wide with confusion. "Captain, we weren't ordered to launch." Thessaly cut her off. "We are now. Get the engines hot. We've got 15 SEALs about to die, and we're the only ones who can reach them." Iris hesitated for exactly 2 seconds, then nodded and sprinted for the aircraft. Behind Thessaly, the hatch burst open and Commander Harland emerged with 4 security personnel. Commander Harland's voice cut through the roar of ocean wind like a serrated blade. "Captain Crane, step away from that aircraft. I will have you in chains if you take one more step." His face had gone crimson, veins bulging in his neck, and the security team behind him had hands on their sidearms. Not drawn, but ready. Thessaly turned to face them, her flight jacket whipping around her body, and in that moment, she made a choice that would define the rest of her life. Sir, with all due respect, those men don't have time for chains or protocols. They have maybe 8 minutes before they're overrun. I'm going. Her voice didn't waver. Years of flight training had taught her to stay calm when everything screamed at you to panic, and she channeled every ounce of that discipline into her words now. Harland closed the distance between them in 4 long strides, getting close enough that she could see the coffee stain on his collar and smell the mint gum he always chewed during operations. You will destroy your career. You will spend years in Leavenworth. Your family will be humiliated. Every sacrifice you've made will mean nothing. Is that really worth 15 men who knew the risks when they signed up? The question was meant to break her resolve, but it had the opposite effect. Her father had known the risks too. Marcus had known them. Every person who died waiting for help that never came had known the risks. Knowledge didn't make abandonment acceptable. Yes, sir, she said quietly. It's worth it. And I think deep down you know it too. That's why you're trying to talk me out of it instead of having your men shoot me. Something flickered behind Harlan's eyes. Respect, maybe, or anger at being read so accurately. The security team shifted uncomfortably. Thessaly recognized one of them, Corporal Linus Wade, whose brother had been killed in Helmand province when their convoy was ambushed and air support arrived too late. She caught his eye, and for a moment, understanding passed between them. He'd lost someone to the same bureaucratic calculus that was killing men right now. His hand moved away from his sidearm. Harlan noticed. Corporal Wade, if you even think about. But Thessaly was already moving. She spun and sprinted the 30 feet to the Osprey, where Iris had the engine cycling up, the twin rotors beginning their slow acceleration to full power. Behind her, boots hammered on the deck. Harland was shouting orders, his words lost in the building roar of the aircraft. She reached the ramp, grabbed the handle, and pulled herself up into the belly of the machine that smelled like hydraulic fluid and possibility. Inside, her co-pilot Lieutenant Rhett Mercer looked at her with wide eyes. Captain, what the hell is happening? I'm getting conflicting orders on the radio. Command says abort, but you're here and the engines are hot and... Thessaly cut him off by keying the internal comms. Everyone listen up. We are launching an unauthorized rescue mission. 15 SEALs are dying in Iran right now, and Command has decided they're expendable. I have not decided that. This is treason. This is mutiny. This will ruin all of our lives. If anyone wants off this bird, you have 15 seconds to make that choice. Silence filled the aircraft. Iris appeared in the cockpit doorway, her face set with determination. I'm in, Captain. My uncle died because someone decided he wasn't worth the risk. Not happening on my watch. Rhett took a shaky breath, then nodded. My daughter asked me last week what it means to be brave. Guess I'm about to show her. The ramp began to close. Through the narrowing gap, Thessaly saw Harland reach the aircraft, his face a mask of fury and something else. Something that might have been anguish. He knew she was right. He knew those men deserved rescue. But he was bound by chains of command and political consequence that she was about to shatter. As the ramp sealed and the Osprey lifted off the deck, Thessaly caught one last glimpse of Corporal Wade. He wasn't moving to stop them. He was standing at attention, and unless she was mistaken, he was saluting. The gesture sent a shiver down her spine. This wasn't just her rebellion. It was a statement that some orders deserved to be disobeyed. The Osprey banked hard, rotors biting into the night air, and headed toward the Iranian coast at maximum speed. The clock read 23:51. 9 minutes until midnight. 90 seconds until they crossed into Iranian airspace and became international criminals. The Osprey screamed across black water at 200 knots, flying so low that spray from the waves misted the windscreen. Thessaly had her hands locked on the controls, every sense tuned to the aircraft's vibrations and the threat board lighting up with radar contacts. Iranian patrol boats dotted the waters below them, and somewhere above, fighter jets were scrambling. She turned off the transponder and running lights, making them a ghost in the darkness, but ghosts could still be shot down. Beside her, Rhett worked the countermeasures panel with hands that moved like a pianist's, ready to deploy chaff and flares the instant a missile locked on. "Talk to me, Rhett. What's our threat picture?" Her voice was steady, professional. The voice of a pilot who'd done this 100 times even though her heart hammered against her ribs. Rhett's screen showed 5 radar contacts converging on their projected route. 2 F-14 Tomcats airborne from Boucher, ETA to intercept 6 minutes. 3 patrol boats adjusting course, probably tracking us on thermal. The good news is we're in their radar shadow. All this low-level flight is making us hard to paint. The bad news is we're flying straight into the most heavily defended airspace in the region with 0 backup and no authorization. If we get shot down, nobody's coming for us. He said it without judgment, just stating facts, and Thessaly appreciated that. Some crews would be screaming at her right now, demanding she turn back. But Rhett understood something crucial. Some people were worth dying for, and tonight, 15 SEALs had drawn that line in the sand. "ETA to target?" she asked. "For minutes." GPS coordinates put them in a compound 2 miles inland, surrounded by approximately 60 hostiles based on thermal imaging. The SEALs are fortified in the main building's basement, but enemy forces are preparing to breach with explosives. Iris's voice crackled through the headset from the cargo bay. "Captain, I've got the extraction rig ready. Fast rope deployment, grab-and-go setup. But we're going to be sitting ducks for the 30 seconds it takes to get them aboard." 30 seconds. An eternity when people were shooting at you. Thessaly had run the math in her head during the flight. Best case scenario, they got in and out with only moderate damage to the aircraft. Worst case, they all died and proved Commander Harland right about the mission being impossible. The thought of Harland made her jaw clench. He wasn't a bad man, that was the tragedy. He was a good man forced to make terrible choices by a system that valued political optics over human lives. The radio suddenly erupted with a voice she recognized. "Unidentified aircraft approaching Iranian territorial waters. This is U.S. Naval Command. You are ordered to abort mission and return to base immediately. Acknowledge." It was Admiral Torrance, and his tone carried the weight of absolute authority. Thessaly's finger hovered over the transmit button. She could respond, could try to explain, could beg for understanding. But words wouldn't change minds that were already made up. Instead, she reached down and switched the radio frequency to the SEAL team's emergency channel. Static hissed for 3 seconds, then Bridger Knox's voice came through, ragged and desperate. "This is Phantom 1-6. We are combat ineffective, multiple casualties. Building is compromised. If anyone can hear this, we need immediate extraction or this becomes a recovery mission." The despair in his voice pierced something deep in Thessaly's chest. She keyed the mic. "Phantom 1-6, this is Guardian Angel. I'm 90 seconds out and coming in hot. Clear your roof and prepare for fast rope extraction." Silence. Then, "Guardian Angel." Command said no rescue was authorized. "Who the hell is this?" Thessaly smiled grimly. "Someone who doesn't take orders very well. Mark your position with IR strobes. I'll have you airborne in 90 seconds or die trying." Another pause, longer this time, and when Bridger spoke again, his voice cracked with emotion. "Tess? Is that you? Oh my God. They're going to crucify you for this." She could hear explosions in the background, the sharp crack of grenades, men shouting. "They'll have to catch me first. 60 seconds, Bridger. Get your wounded ready to move." She clicked off before he could argue, before the reality of what she was doing could fully sink in. The Iranian coastline appeared ahead, a line of lights marking civilization and the beginning of enemy territory. Rhett looked at her. "Once we cross that line, we're committed. No going back." Thessaly pushed the throttles forward. "Then let's make it count." The compound materialized out of darkness like a wound in the earth. Concrete walls scarred by bullet impacts. 3 buildings arranged in a triangle around a central courtyard where vehicles burned with orange flame. Thermal imaging showed clusters of heat signatures surrounding the northern building where the SEALs were trapped, and Thessaly could see muzzle flashes strobing in the darkness like deadly fireflies. The enemy had brought up a technical, a truck with a heavy machine gun mounted in the bed, and it was chewing through the building's walls with methodical precision. Every third round was a tracer, drawing lines of red death through the night. She banked the Osprey hard, feeling the airframe shudder as she pushed it beyond recommended stress limits, and came in from the east where a small clearing offered just enough space for a hover insertion. Rhett was calling out altitudes and threats in a steady stream. 100 feet, multiple RPG signatures. Taking small arms fire from the western wall, 60 feet. Rotor wash is kicking up debris, 40 feet. Captain, we've got a missile lock. Sam launch from the compound perimeter. His voice climbed an octave on the last words. Thessaly's hands moved on pure instinct, slamming the Osprey into a violent sideslip while Rhett punched the flare release. Magnesium bloomed in their wake, white-hot decoys that screamed into the night, and the missile's seeker head lost them in the thermal confusion. The missile corkscrewed into the ground 200 meters away, its explosion lighting up the compound in flickering orange. That was too close, Rhett breathed, and Thessaly didn't disagree. But there was no time for relief. They were committed now, hanging in the air like a target at a shooting gallery. The Osprey's rotors kicked up a storm of dust and debris that turned the world into a brown nightmare. Thessaly fought to maintain stable hover while Iris deployed the fast ropes, thick braided lines that dropped from the cargo bay into the chaos below. Ropes away. Insertion team go, go, go. Iris's voice carried the controlled urgency of someone who'd trained for this moment their entire career but never expected to do it against orders. 4 of the ship's Marines who'd volunteered for this madness slid down the ropes, their weapons tracking for targets the instant their boots hit dirt. They'd come along despite knowing this mission was unauthorized, and Thessaly would never forget that loyalty. The Marines formed a defensive perimeter, and through the dust storm, she saw figures emerging from a blown-out doorway, SEALs carrying their wounded, some limping, others being dragged. The compound exploded with renewed gunfire. Tracers converged on the Osprey from 3 directions, and Thessaly heard the distinct ping of rounds hitting the fuselage. An alarm blared in the cockpit, hydraulic pressure dropping in the port engine. Not critical yet, but it would be if they stayed much longer. "We're taking damage," Rhett shouted, fighting with the controls to compensate for the failing hydraulics. Through the chaos, Thessaly saw Bridger Knox appear, his face streaked with blood and dust, hauling a wounded SEAL over his shoulder. Behind him came Merrick Stone, providing covering fire with his rifle while dragging another casualty with his free hand. They moved with the practiced efficiency of men who'd trained together until movement became instinct, but she could see exhaustion in every step. These were warriors at the end of their reserves, running on pure will. Iris was at the cargo ramp, firing her sidearm at enemy positions while simultaneously helping wounded SEALs aboard. "We've got 8 loaded. Come on, move, move." Her voice cut through the weapon fire and rotor noise. Thessaly counted in her head, 8 out of 15. Where were the others? An RPG streaked past the Osprey's nose, missing by inches, and she reflexively jerked the stick, causing the aircraft to lurch. Someone screamed in the cargo bay, a wounded man who'd been jostled. Marek's voice came through the chaos. "We've got 7 Kia. They're already gone, Tess. We have to leave them." The words hit like a fist. 7 dead. 7 families destroyed. But 8 were still breathing, and that meant 8 families who might see their loved ones again. "Get everyone aboard now," Thessaly commanded. "We're 30 seconds from losing this bird." The port engine temperature was climbing into the red zone. Another alarm joined the first. The Osprey was dying around them, and the only question was whether they'd get airborne before it gave up completely. Bridger Knox hauled himself aboard the Osprey, his arms shaking from exhaustion and blood loss from a shrapnel wound in his thigh. He collapsed against the bulkhead, eyes searching the cargo bay, doing the math that every leader dreaded. 8 survivors. 7 bodies they'd had to leave in that basement. Men who died calling for mothers and wives and God while enemy forces closed in. Lieutenant Jace Hartwell, who just turned 24 and planned to propose to his girlfriend when he got home. Chief Petty Officer Knox Brennan, father of twins who'd sent him care packages every week. Specialist Thorne Keating, who'd saved Bridger's life in Syria 2 years ago. Their faces flashed through his mind, and the weight of their absence crushed something in his chest. He'd led them into that facility. He'd believed the intelligence. He'd promised them they'd all make it home. The Osprey lurched upward, climbing fast but unevenly, the damaged engine screaming in protest. Thessaly was pushing the aircraft beyond its limits, trading safety margins for speed, because every second they remained over Iranian territory was another chance for a missile to finish what the first one had started. Bridger could see her in the cockpit, silhouetted against the instrument lights, her hands moving in constant correction as she wrestled with failing controls. She'd thrown away everything for them. Her career, her freedom, probably her life, and he didn't know whether to thank her or curse her for the sacrifice. The Marine fire team was securing the wounded, applying tourniquets and pressure bandages with practiced efficiency. Merrick Stone sat near the ramp, his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. He'd been the one to make the call about who they could save and who they had to leave. That decision would haunt him forever. Thessaly's voice came through the headset, tight with concentration. "Rhett, give me everything the starboard engine has left. Port is at 80% and dropping. We need altitude before those fighters intercept." Rhett's response was clipped. "Starboard is maxed. We're not going to outrun F-14s, Captain. We need a miracle or a hiding spot, and we're fresh out of both." The radar screen showed the Iranian fighters closing from the north, 3 minutes to intercept. Even damaged, the Tomcats carried missiles that could swat them from the sky before they ever saw the launch. Bridger pulled himself up, stumbled to the cockpit, and grabbed the door frame. "Tess, there's a wadi 15 miles southeast of here. Deep canyon. Narrow enough their radar can't track us on the deck. That's how we infiltrated. Can you make it there?" She glanced back, her eyes red-rimmed but fierce. "Only one way to find out." The Osprey banked violently, changing course, and the sudden movement sent several men sliding across the cargo bay floor. One of the wounded, Corporal Sullivan, who'd taken 3 rounds to the chest and somehow survived, cried out in pain. Iris was immediately at his side, murmuring reassurance while checking his bandages. The woman was unflappable, Bridger thought. While the world fell apart around them, she maintained calm like it was a superpower. 2 minutes to wadi entrance," Thessaly announced. "Rhett, kill all non-essential electrical. I need every bit of power for the engines." The cabin lights died, plunging them into darkness broken only by the red glow of emergency strips and the green wash of instrument panels. The Osprey dropped altitude so fast Bridger's stomach lurched. They were diving toward the desert floor, racing Iranian fighters to a hiding place that might not even work. Through the windscreen, Bridger saw the wadi appear. A jagged crack in the earth carved by centuries of flash floods, walls rising 200 feet on either side. Thessaly threaded the Osprey into that canyon like a needle through cloth, the rotors clearing the rock walls by margins measured in feet rather than yards. The aircraft's strobe lights reflected off stone, creating a strobe light nightmare of shadows and obstacles. "Contact!" Rhett shouted. "Fighters are overhead. They're overshooting. We're in the radar shadow." The roar of jet engines passed above them, hunting but not finding. Thessaly had bought them time, maybe 5 minutes before the fighters circled back. The port engine chose that moment to fail completely, its death rattle echoing through the airframe. They were flying on one engine now, barely maintaining altitude, trapped in a canyon with enemy forces above and damaged too badly to fight their way out. Bridger looked at Thessaly's reflection in the cockpit glass and saw the truth she wasn't saying. They'd saved the SEALs, but now they all might die together. The Osprey limped through the wadi like a wounded bird, its single-functioning engine howling with strain. Thessaly kept them barely 20 feet off the canyon floor, so low that dust devils from the rotor wash painted the windscreen brown. Her arms ached from fighting the controls, every muscle burning with the effort of keeping the crippled aircraft airborne. Behind her in the cargo bay, men who'd survived one nightmare were now trapped in another, and the weight of that responsibility pressed down like a physical force. She'd saved them from the compound only to deliver them to a slower death in the Iranian desert. The thought made her jaw clench so hard her teeth ached. Rhett was working the damaged radio, trying to raise the sentinel, but Iranian jamming had turned the airwaves into soup. Then something unexpected happened. Rhett's screen flickered, and a burst transmission came through, not from the Sentinel, but from a source designator Thessaly didn't recognize. The message was brief, encrypted military standard, and when Rhett decoded it, he stared at the screen for 3 full seconds before speaking. "Captain, you're not going to believe this. It's from Corporal Wade. He's forwarding real-time satellite intelligence on Iranian fighter positions. And he's saying," Rhett's voice caught. "He's saying Admiral Torrance has ordered the USS Stockdale to move into position for emergency support. They're not authorized to enter Iranian airspace, but they're positioning for immediate extraction the moment we cross the territorial line." Thessaly's heart stuttered. Torrance was helping them? The same admiral who'd ordered them to leave the SEALs to die. The transmission continued scrolling across the screen, and Rhett read aloud, "Enemy fighters searching grid pattern. Window opens in 4 minutes when they're refueling at Boucher. Recommended extraction point marked. You'll have 7 minutes to cross the line. Stockdale will have combat air patrol ready. Admiral says you're still facing court-martial when this is over, but he'll be damned if you die in Iran. Godspeed, Guardian Angel." The words hung in the cockpit like a prayer. Thessaly felt something break loose in her chest. Not quite hope, but something close to it. They'd broken every rule, defied direct orders, committed what would legally be considered treason, but someone higher up the chain had decided their lives still mattered. Or maybe Torrance had simply decided that letting them die would be a worse stain on his conscience than helping them. Bridger appeared at the cockpit door, his face pale but determined. "What's happening? Are we getting out of here?" Thessaly showed him the screen, watched his eyes scan the message, saw the disbelief and gratitude war across his features. "After everything, they're still coming for us?" His voice cracked on the last word, and Thessaly understood. He'd been abandoned once tonight, told his life was expendable. Learning that someone had changed their mind, that someone in power had decided to risk political fallout to bring them home, it restored something that betrayal had taken. "Seems like it," Thessaly said. "But we've got 4 minutes to reach the extraction point, and we're flying on 1 engine through enemy territory. This isn't over yet." She pulled up the coordinates Wade had sent and plotted the course. 22 miles to the border. Normally an easy run, but with their damaged aircraft and enemy fighters hunting, it might as well have been 1,000. The Osprey lurched as she coaxed it up and out of the wadi, exposing them to open sky but giving the struggling engine room to breathe. The airframe vibrated alarmingly, and new warning lights were illuminating across the panel like a malevolent Christmas display. Hydraulic failure. Fuel leak. Starboard engine temperature critical. The aircraft was falling apart around them, held together by luck and Thessaly's refusal to let it quit. "Talk to me, Rhett. Where are those fighters?" He studied the satellite feed. "Still north of our position, but they're spreading their search pattern. We've got maybe 3 minutes before someone spots us." 3 minutes. Thessaly checked their airspeed. Barely 120 knots, slower than normal by half. They were a sitting duck and everyone aboard knew it. But they were a sitting duck that was still flying, still fighting, and that had to count for something. She keyed the internal comms. "Everyone hold on. We're making a run for the border, and it's going to get rough." In the cargo bay, Merrick Stone looked up at the survivors around him, men who'd been written off as acceptable losses, and tightened his grip on the emergency strap. "Rough we can handle," he said quietly. "It's giving up that kills you." The desert unwound beneath them like a ribbon of death, moonlight painting the sand in shades of silver and shadow. Thessaly had the Osprey pushed to its absolute limits, the single working engine screaming at temperatures that made the warning alarm sound like a continuous wail. Rhett had disabled the most annoying alerts just so they could hear each other think, but the flashing red lights remained, painting their faces in hellish colors. 2 miles behind them, one of the Iranian F-14s had broken off from the search pattern and was vectoring their direction. The pilot had either gotten lucky or spotted their thermal signature, and now it was a race between a crippled transport and a supersonic fighter. The math didn't favor them. "Contact bearing 090, range 4 miles and closing fast," Rhett called out, his voice admirably steady considering they were probably 30 seconds from being vaporized. He's achieved missile lock. Thessaly didn't hesitate. She threw the Osprey into a diving turn that made the damaged airframe scream, pulling G-forces that would have been dangerous in a healthy aircraft and were potentially catastrophic in their current state. Metal groaned. Something in the cargo bay tore loose and crashed against the bulkhead. One of the wounded SEALs cried out, but Iris's calm voice was there immediately, reassuring him. The missile lock tone in the cockpit went quiet. They'd broken the lock through sheer maneuverability, but the fighter was still coming. He's repositioning for guns, Rhett warned. 20 seconds until he's in firing range. Bridger stumbled into the cockpit, grabbing the door frame as the Osprey bucked through turbulent air. Tess, what can we do? We're not fighters, we can't dogfight with an F-14. She didn't answer immediately, her eyes scanning the terrain ahead. Then she saw it. A series of ridgelines running parallel to their course, jagged mountains that rose like broken teeth from the desert floor. It was insane. It was also their only chance. Hold on to something, she said, and dove toward the mountains at full throttle. The altimeter unwound crazily as they dropped, the rocky ridges rushing up to meet them with terrifying speed. At the last possible second, Thessaly pulled up hard, skimming along the ridgeline with less than 10 feet of clearance. The Osprey wasn't designed for this kind of flying. It was a transport, not a fighter, but desperation made skilled pilots do impossible things. The Iranian pilot tried to follow, but his closing speed was too high. He shot past their position, unable to match their maneuver at his velocity, and by the time he'd pulled up and circled back, Thessaly had the Osprey behind another ridgeline, using the terrain to mask their thermal signature. He's lost us, Rhett breathed, disbelief coloring his voice. He's circling but can't get a lock. Tess, that was... He didn't finish the sentence. Probably couldn't find words adequate for what she'd just done. Thessaly's hands trembled on the controls, adrenaline flooding her system now that the immediate danger had passed. She'd been operating on pure instinct, trusting years of training and a pilot's sense for what an aircraft could handle. They'd been lucky. Skill had gotten them close, but luck had kept them alive. Border is 2 miles ahead, Rhett announced. USS Stockdale has 4 F-18s in combat air patrol just on the other side. The moment we cross, a new alarm cut him off. The starboard engine temperature had spiked into critical range, and the RPM was dropping. They were losing their last engine. Come on, baby, Thessaly whispered to the aircraft, coaxing it forward like a rider urging a dying horse toward home. Just 2 more miles. You can do this. The Osprey shuddered violently, and black smoke began streaming from the starboard nacelle. Fire warning light. They were burning. Engine fire starboard side. Rhett shouted, reaching for the extinguisher controls. But Thessaly caught his hand. Not yet. We need every second of thrust. The moment we shut it down, we're gliding, and we won't make the border. It was a calculated risk. Let the engine burn and hope it held together long enough, or shut it down and crash in Iranian territory. The border appeared ahead, marked on their navigation display as a simple line but representing the difference between rescue and death. The Iranian fighter was behind them again, closing fast, but American F-18s were streaking toward their position from the other direction. It was going to be close, a race measured in seconds and miles with 15 lives hanging in the balance. The starboard engine exploded, not catastrophically, but enough to send a shockwave through the airframe and kill all remaining thrust. They were gliding now, trading altitude for distance, the Osprey's descent rate climbing while the borderline crept closer with agonizing slowness. Thessaly worked the controls like a sculptor working clay, using every trick she knew to stretch their glide, to squeeze 1 more 100 yards from a machine that had given everything it had. Behind her, she heard Iris leading the survivors in prayer. A simple, honest plea for deliverance. And then, impossibly, they crossed the line. We're out, Rhett shouted. We're in international airspace. The F-18s roared past them, placing themselves between the Osprey and the Iranian fighter, who wisely broke off pursuit. The Stockdale was directly ahead, its deck crews already positioned for an emergency recovery. Thessaly aimed for it, knowing they had one chance to land this burning aircraft before it fell from the sky. The USS Stockdale's flight deck rushed up to meet them, gray steel and organized chaos as the crash crew stood ready with foam cannons and emergency equipment. Thessaly had the Osprey in a controlled crash descent. There was no other way to describe it, trading every last foot of altitude for forward momentum. The aircraft was dying beneath her hands, systems failing in cascading sequence, and she could smell burning insulation through the ventilation. Behind her, the cargo bay had gone quiet except for labored breathing and whispered prayers. These men had survived a firefight, a betrayal, and a desperate run through enemy territory. Now their fate rested on whether she could land a burning aircraft on a moving ship in the dark. The weight of that responsibility would have crushed her if she'd let herself think about it. So she didn't think. She just flew. Rhett was calling out numbers in a steady stream. 200 feet, descent rate 18 feet per second, we're coming in hot, 150 feet, you're left of centerline, correcting 100 feet. Captain, the approach is too steep, we're gonna hit hard. Thessaly knew. The damaged flight controls wouldn't let her flatten the approach angle, and they were falling faster than any safe landing profile allowed. But safe had stopped being an option about an hour ago, when she'd spit on Commander Harlan's floor and committed career suicide. She had two choices: commit to this landing or ditch in the ocean and hope everyone survived the water impact. The ocean meant risking the wounded SEALs who couldn't swim, meant hypothermia and chaos. The deck meant a violent impact but immediate medical care. She chose the deck. "Brace for impact," she shouted into the intercom, and drove the Osprey down toward the landing zone. The deck crew scattered. Protocol said they should clear the area when an aircraft was coming in this damaged. But she saw two figures remain at the deck edge, waving illuminated wands, guiding her in because apparently some sailors were just as crazy as she was. 50 feet. 40. 30. The Osprey was falling like a stone now, and Thessaly pulled back on the stick with everything she had, trying to arrest the descent. The rotors clawed at the air, slowing them from catastrophic to merely terrible. 20 feet. 10. The landing gear hit the deck with a crunch that sounded like bones breaking. The starboard gear collapsed immediately. Too much lateral stress on compromised structure. And the Osprey slewed sideways, rotors still spinning, the aircraft sliding across the deck in a shower of sparks. Time dilated into a strange slow-motion nightmare. Thessaly saw deck crew diving for cover as the Osprey skidded toward them. She felt Rhett's hand grab her shoulder, anchoring himself or comforting her. She couldn't tell. She heard someone in the cargo bay screaming, a sound of pure terror that would haunt her dreams. And then, impossibly, they stopped. The Osprey came to rest canted at a 15-degree angle, smoke pouring from both engines, the smell of burning fuel thick enough to taste. But they were down. They were alive. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Then chaos erupted. The cargo ramp dropped and crew swarmed aboard, pulling wounded SEALs out with practiced efficiency. Medical teams appeared with stretchers and equipment. Foam sprayed over the burning engines, white clouds that looked like snow in the deck lights. Thessaly tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't cooperate. The adrenaline that had kept her functioning was draining away, leaving exhaustion so profound she could barely breathe. Rhett helped her up, and together they stumbled out of the cockpit. The cargo bay was organized chaos. Medics working on casualties, officers shouting orders, damage control teams securing the aircraft. Through the smoke and confusion, Thessaly saw Bridger Knox sitting against the bulkhead, his face streaked with tears. He was holding the hand of Corporal Sullivan, who'd been hit in the chest during the firefight. The medics were working on Sullivan with desperate intensity, but even from across the bay, Thessaly could see the truth. He wasn't going to make it. She watched Bridger lean close, watched him whisper something in Sullivan's ear, watched the dying man smile, squeeze Bridger's hand once, and then go still. The medics kept working, refusing to give up, but the outcome was already written. 7 SEALs left behind in Iran. 1 more lost here on the deck, 90 seconds after reaching safety. 8 out of 15 saved. The math of survival was brutal and unforgiving. Thessaly had risked everything. Her career, her crew, her life, and the mission was still a tragedy. But as she watched Bridger close Sullivan's eyes with a gentle hand, watched the surviving SEALs gather around their fallen brother, She knew with absolute certainty that she'd made the right choice. Because 7 families would get folded flags and empty condolences. But 8 would get their loved ones back alive. And that was worth everything she'd sacrificed. 6 hours later, Thessaly Crane stood at attention in Admiral Torrance's office aboard the USS Sentinel. Her flight suit still stained with smoke and blood. She hadn't slept, hadn't eaten, had barely spoken since stepping off the Stockdale. The survivors had been airlifted to a military hospital in Germany. The dead were being prepared for transport home. Her crew, Rhett, Iris, and the 4 Marines who'd volunteered, were in separate quarters awaiting their own hearings. Everything she'd done had consequences, and now those consequences were standing before her in the form of a man whose face showed exhaustion, frustration, and something she couldn't quite identify. Torrance studied her in silence for what felt like an eternity, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. Behind him, through the porthole, dawn was breaking over the Persian Gulf. Pink and gold light painting the water in colors too beautiful for the ugliness of war. "Captain Crane," Torrance finally said, his voice measured and cold. "In my 37 years of military service, I have never encountered such a blatant act of insubordination. You disobeyed direct orders from your commanding officer. You stole military assets without authorization. You violated international airspace and engaged in combat operations that could have triggered a diplomatic incident. You risked your crew's lives on a mission I specifically prohibited. You understand that each of these charges carries a prison sentence." "Yes." Thessaly met his eyes without flinching. "Yes, sir. I understand." She wouldn't apologize. Couldn't. Because if faced with the same choice again, 15 men left to die or her career, she'd make the same decision in a heartbeat. Some things were worth the cost. Torrance's jaw tightened, and for a moment, she thought he might explode with the kind of rage Harland had shown. Instead, he did something unexpected. He smiled. It was brief, sad, and carried the weight of years. "Commander Harland wants you court-martialed. He's filed formal charges that would see you in Leavenworth for a decade. And legally, professionally, he's absolutely right to do so. You broke every rule we have." Torrance stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "But here's what keeps me up at night, Captain. Those 8 SEALs you brought back. They're alive because you refused to accept that their lives were expendable. Their families still have husbands, fathers, sons. Clara Stone got to hug her husband before her baby was born yesterday morning. A girl, by the way. Bridger Knox's sister Lyra sent me a message. She said her brother told her that you proved the impossible is just the difficult plus courage." He turned back to face her, and Thessaly saw moisture in his eyes. "You did what I should have authorized from the start, and that makes me complicit in the deaths of 7 good men." The admission hung in the air between them. Thessaly wanted to tell him it wasn't his fault, that the system had failed everyone that night, but she couldn't find words adequate to the complexity of blame and choice. Torrance continued, "I've been in discussion with the Joint Chiefs and the Secretary of Defense. Officially, you are being dishonorably discharged for your actions. Your pension is forfeit. You will never fly military aircraft again. Commander Harland gets his pound of flesh, and the brass gets to show they don't tolerate rogue operators." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Thessaly felt something inside her chest crack. The finality of losing the career she'd built, the identity she'd worn like armor. Flying was who she was. Without it, she didn't know what remained. But then Torrance opened a desk drawer and pulled out a folder. "Unofficially," he said, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, "you are being recommended for the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism. The recommendation is being filed under classified cover because we can't publicly acknowledge the operation. You'll never wear the medal, never receive public recognition. But 8 men are alive because you had the courage I lacked. That matters more than brass and ribbons." He handed her the folder. Inside was her discharge paperwork, marked dishonorable in official typeface. Beneath it was a handwritten letter on Admiral stationery. "History will not record what you did, but every person you saved will carry your name in their hearts. That is a memorial more lasting than any monument. Fair winds and following seas, Captain Crane. Tears blurred Thessaly's vision, and she didn't try to stop them. This was the ending. Not the one she'd imagined when she joined the Navy at 18 with dreams of honor and service, but perhaps the one she'd been moving toward her entire life. Your crew is being quietly transferred to other units, Torrance continued. They'll face no charges. I'm taking full responsibility for the operational confusion that night. Corporal Wade is being commended for his communications work. As for you, he extended his hand, and Thessaly shook it, feeling the firm grip of a man who'd made peace with a complicated truth. You saved lives at the cost of your career. Some would call that foolish. I call it the finest example of service I've ever witnessed. Now get out of my Navy, Captain, before I change my mind and give you a medal ceremony. She saluted one final time, crisp and perfect, holding it until he returned it. Then Thessaly Crane walked out of that office and into uncertain civilian life, carrying nothing but a folder full of endings and beginnings. Outside, the morning sun painted the deck in golden light. She saw Bridger Knox waiting by the rail, his leg bandaged but healing. When he saw her, he straightened and saluted, a gesture that said more than words ever could. Behind him, Merrick Stone held a photo of his newborn daughter, eyes red but smiling. 8 survivors stood scattered across that deck, alive because one woman had refused to accept that some lives were acceptable losses. Thessaly didn't know what came next, what career could possibly follow the one she destroyed. But as those 8 men gathered around her, as Bridger wrapped her in a fierce embrace and whispered, "Thank you," against her shoulder, she understood something fundamental. Heroes weren't defined by the medals they wore or the orders they followed. They were defined by the choices they made when the cost was highest and the rules said to look away. She had lost everything that night: career, pension, identity, future. But standing on that deck surrounded by men who'd been written off as expendable, Thessaly Crane knew with absolute certainty that she'd gained something more valuable than anything the Navy could have given her. She'd gained the knowledge that when it mattered most, when lives hung in the balance and authority said to abandon them, she had chosen humanity over protocol. And that choice, with all its terrible costs and complicated consequences, was the truest act of service she'd ever performed. The sun climbed higher, painting the world in light, and for the first time in 6 hours, Thessaly Crane smiled. The end.